whip lay in 2 pieces on the auction block, snapped clean through the handle. Sunday morning, August 1856. The Harrington Plantation in central Georgia. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. But everyone saw it. The enslaved gathered at a distance, faces blank, eyes down. They whispered without moving their lips, passing the knowledge like a current through still water. The overseer's whip, the same one that had marked backs and broken spirits, split in half like kindling. James Thornton stood over the broken pieces, his shadow stretching long across the weathered wood. He didn't touch them, didn't shout, didn't demand answers. He just stared, his jaw tight, his mind working through possibilities. This wasn't an accident. You don't snap leather and braided cord by dropping it. You don't break an overseer's whip by chance. Someone had done this. Someone with strength. Someone with intent. And everyone in that gathering knew exactly who. The man who couldn't speak had finally made a sound. Welcome to Black Earth Stories. Before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any story. For 17 years, Caleb had been silent. Mute since he was 17. He moved through the cotton fields like smoke, present but unseen, there but never noticed. He'd survived by being invisible. But that morning, standing on the block where human beings were sold like livestock, his silence had ended. Not with words. With action. Thornton picked up one piece of the whip, turned it slowly in his hands. The break was deliberate, forceful, final, and everyone knew who did it. What happened next would change everything. But to understand how a mute slave broke the most feared overseer in Georgia, we have to go back 4 months, to the spring of 1856, when Thornton first arrived. Spring arrived early that year. April 1856. Charles Harrington needed a new overseer, and he needed one fast. The previous man had been too soft, too easily manipulated. Profits were slipping. Discipline was fracturing. The plantation required order. Thornton came with a reputation that preceded him like thunder before rain. He'd been dismissed from 3 plantations across Georgia and South Carolina. Not for brutality. Plenty of overseers were brutal. Thornton was dismissed for being too efficient, too calculating, too effective at breaking the human spirit without leaving visible scars. Other plantation owners feared what he represented. Control so absolute it made their own methods look barbaric by comparison. He didn't believe in random violence. He believed in systems, in observation, in exploiting weakness until resistance became impossible. Men feared his voice more than his whip. When he spoke, it was quiet, measured, final. His words carried the weight of inevitable consequence. You didn't argue with Thornton. You didn't negotiate. You obeyed, or you discovered exactly how far he was willing to go to ensure future obedience. His philosophy was simple. Break the will, not just the body. A broken body heals. A broken will remains shattered. The day he arrived, the entire plantation fell silent. Word had spread through the quarters the night before. The new overseer was coming. Someone had heard his name. Someone else knew someone who'd worked under him. By dawn, fear had already taken root. Thornton dismounted his horse slowly, methodically. He surveyed the fields, the cabins, the work gangs like a general assessing unfamiliar terrain. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging details others would miss. Who stood too close together. Who avoided eye contact. Who whispered when they thought he wasn't watching. He spent his first day doing nothing but observing. Walking the property. Noting patterns. Identifying the strongest, the most defiant, the ones who might organize resistance. By evening, he'd memorized every face. He believed secrets were the seeds of rebellion. Hidden knowledge meant hidden power. And Thornton despised anything he couldn't see, couldn't measure, couldn't control. He would root out every secret on this plantation. every whispered plan, every concealed skill, every hidden relationship that might foster loyalty stronger than fear. Within a week, submission became automatic. People moved faster, worked harder, stopped meeting each other's eyes. But there was one slave he couldn't figure out. A man who worked the cotton fields without ever looking up, who never spoke, who seemed to exist in a space between visibility and complete absence. Thornton noticed him on the third day, and he was about to discover one that would unravel everything. His name was Caleb, 34 years old. He'd been mute for 17 years, since the summer he turned 17. Nobody knew exactly why. Some said it was fever, a sickness that swept through the quarters in 1839, taking his voice along with his mother's strength. Others whispered it was trauma, that he'd witnessed something so terrible his voice simply stopped, locked behind a door that would never open again. Caleb never confirmed either story. He couldn't. 17 years of silence. Not a single word. But he'd learned something crucial in those years. Invisibility was survival. Never look up. Never meet eyes. Never draw attention. Move through the rows like wind through grass. Present but unnoticed. Work steadily, competently, without complaint or distinction. Become a shadow. The Harrington plantation stretched across 800 acres of central Georgia soil. Cotton mostly, some tobacco, vegetables for the main house. 200 enslaved people worked the land in a rigid hierarchy. House servants at the top, skilled craftsmen next, then field hands divided by strength and temperament. Caleb existed somewhere outside that structure. Not quite invisible, but never quite seen. He picked cotton, hauled water, mended fences, did whatever task was assigned without resistance, without error. His hands moved with quiet efficiency that made overseers forget he was there. And that's exactly what kept him alive. But silence didn't mean powerless. His world had shrunk to essentials: sunrise, work, sunset, sleep. The rhythm of seasons measured in planted rows and harvested bales. The weight of heat in July. The bite of cold in January mornings. And Ruth, his sister, 28 years old, working in the main house now. She was his only family, his only connection to the person he'd been before the silence. They'd survived their mother's death together 6 years earlier. They'd endured separations, threats, the constant possibility of being sold away from each other. Ruth understood his silence. She'd learned to read his expressions, the slight movements of his hands, the way his shoulders shifted when he was worried or afraid. She was his reason for survival. Every morning, he'd catch a glimpse of her crossing from the main house to the kitchen. Every evening, if he was lucky, they'd pass near each other during the brief hour between work and sleep. No words needed. Just the confirmation. Still here, still alive, still together. The other enslaved people had stopped trying to include him in conversations years ago. He existed on the periphery of community, present during gatherings, absent from connection. It made him easy to overlook. And being overlooked had advantages Thornton couldn't yet understand. Caleb's quiet competence meant he was trusted with certain tasks. Delivering messages. Moving supplies. Accessing areas other field hands never entered. The old storage cabin, for instance. The one nobody used anymore. But Caleb had a secret that would make him the most dangerous man on the plantation. What Thornton was about to discover would change both their fates. Thornton's first week was spent watching. Not managing, not punishing, just observing every person, every interaction, every unguarded moment. He studied work patterns. Who slowed when he turned away. Who whispered during water breaks. Who showed signs of intelligence they were trying to hide. Intelligence was dangerous. Intelligence fostered hope. And hope, Thornton knew, was rebellion's foundation. On the 5th day, he noticed Caleb. A wagon had arrived with supplies from Savannah. The driver left a shipment invoice on the seat while unloading barrels. Caleb walked past, carrying fence posts toward the eastern field. His eyes flicked to the paper. Just once. A fraction of a second. But Thornton saw it. Not a curious glance. Not the blank stare of someone looking at meaningless symbols. Caleb's eyes had tracked left to right across the text. His pace had stuttered, barely noticeable, as he processed what he'd seen. Then he kept walking. Thornton felt something cold settle in his chest. The mute slave could read. Not just recognize a few words. He could read contracts, invoices, legal documents. The kind of literacy that transformed an enslaved person from property into a threat. Literate slaves could forge travel passes, read abolitionist pamphlets, understand bills of sale and recognize when transactions were illegal. They could educate others, organize in ways overseers couldn't detect. Most overseers would have beaten him immediately, made an example, destroyed the skill through fear and pain. Thornton did something worse. He decided to test him, build a case, confirm the extent of the ability before acting. The next morning, he tore a page from an old ledger and left it near the water barrel. Casual, accidental looking. The page listed names and prices, slave valuations from 2 years prior. Caleb approached the barrel mid-morning, cup in hand. His eyes found the paper, held for 3 seconds, then moved away. Confirmation. Second test came 2 days later. Thornton accidentally dropped an envelope near the barn. It contained nothing important, a letter about cotton prices, but the address was clearly visible. Caleb was assigned to repair boards on that same barn. Thornton watched from the main house window. Caleb hammered steadily, methodically, but when he moved to gather more nails, his path took him directly past the envelope. He paused, adjusted his grip on the hammer. His eyes dropped. Reading. Third test. Thornton placed a bill of sale in Caleb's direct path while he hauled water to the eastern field. Not hidden, not suspicious. Just a document that had blown from the overseer's office and landed on the dirt road. Caleb saw it 20 feet away. His walking rhythm didn't change. His expression remained blank. But when he reached it, his eyes locked on the paper for 5 full seconds before stepping over it. He was reading every word. Thornton's certainty became absolute. This wasn't casual literacy. This was practiced, careful, strategic reading. The kind that came from years of secret study. He was building a case. But Caleb was building something too. The question was, what had a mute, literate slave been reading for the past 2 years that Thornton hadn't yet discovered? And why was he so careful to hide it? 2 years earlier. Summer of 1854. Caleb had been sent to retrieve tools from the old overseer's cabin, a structure abandoned after the previous man left, now used for storage nobody bothered organizing. The cabin smelled of mildew and forgotten things. Broken harnesses hung on walls. Rusted chains lay coiled in corners. Crates of miscellaneous items nobody had catalogued in years. On a shelf near the back, beneath a layer of dust, sat a hymnal. Caleb almost walked past it. But something made him pause. The spine looked wrong, thicker than it should be, warped as though something had been pressed inside. He opened it carefully. The pages felt different. Stiffer. Not printed hymnal pages but something else folded and hidden between them. Fragments of a legal document. His hands shook as he unfolded the brittle paper. The text was faded, some words illegible from water damage and age. But enough remained. Last will and testament. He recognized the format from bills of sale he'd glimpsed over years. Legal language. Formal declarations. Signatures at the bottom. The document was dated 1842. He took it. Hid it in his shirt. Returned to the cabin over the following months whenever he could manufacture a reason to be there alone. Deciphering it took time. His reading was self-taught, cobbled together from stolen glances at documents left unguarded. Legal terminology was complex, dense. But slowly, painfully, the meaning emerged. Charles Harrington Sr., the father of the current plantation owner, had written this will before his death in 1842, and it named specific people for manumission upon his passing. Esther and her children. Esther was his mother. The paper nearly fell from his hands. He read it again, then again, searching for misunderstanding, for misread words, for any interpretation except the obvious one. Signed. Witnessed. Legal. His mother and her children, him and Ruth, were supposed to have been freed the moment Charles Harrington Sr. died 14 years ago, but never filed. The will had been written, properly executed according to Georgia law. 2 witnesses had signed. The old man's intentions were clear and legally binding. Yet somehow, it had ended up hidden in a hymnal in an abandoned cabin. For 14 years, he and Ruth had been enslaved illegally. Everything he'd endured, every beating, every humiliation, every moment of forced labor, had been outside the bounds of law. They should have been free since 1842. Should have had 14 years to build lives, to leave Georgia, to become something other than property. The realization was suffocating. Did Charles Harrington know? Had his father told him about the will before dying? Or had the old man hidden it, changed his mind, decided blood was thicker than written intentions? Maybe the current Harrington had found it and buried it deliberately. Maybe he'd never known it existed. Caleb had no way to find out. And he had no way to prove it without getting killed. Showing the will meant questions. Questions meant revealing his literacy. Revealing literacy meant punishment, possibly death, certainly separation from Ruth. Even if he somehow survived to present it, what white court would honor a will that threatened a white man's wealth? The legal system that created this document was the same system that allowed his enslavement to continue. He was trapped in a cage whose door had been unlocked 14 years ago, but he couldn't reach the handle. For 2 years, he carried this knowledge in silence. But before Caleb could decide what to do, his worst fear became reality. June 1856. The cotton hadn't come in right. Too much rain in April. Then drought through May. The bolls opened stunted and sparse. Charles Harrington's projected profits evaporated into Georgia heat. Creditors began pressing. Letters arrived from Savannah banks. Debts mounted faster than harvests could cover them. The plantation needed cash immediately. Harrington made his decision. Sell assets. Liquidate property. Ruth was worth $1,200. She was 28, healthy, trained for housework. Obedient. No history of resistance. The kind of servant wealthy families in coastal cities paid premium prices to acquire. A rice planter from Savannah needed staff for his main residence. He'd heard about the Harrington plantation's financial troubles and saw opportunity. Made an offer Harrington couldn't refuse. The transaction was set. 3 weeks until the buyer arrived to collect her. Word spread through the quarters like smoke through cracks. Caleb was in the eastern field when he heard. A woman named Dinah walking past with laundry whispered it to another woman. The sound carried just far enough. They selling Ruth. 3 weeks. His hands stopped moving. The cotton boll he'd been reaching for hung untouched. His entire body went rigid, shoulders locked, jaw clenched, breath caught somewhere in his chest. 4 or 5 seconds, he didn't move. Then his hands resumed picking. Same rhythm. Same mechanical efficiency. But inside, something had shattered. 17 years of silence. 17 years of survival by staying invisible, by accepting what couldn't be changed, by enduring. But this he couldn't endure. Ruth wasn't just his sister. She was the last thread connecting him to who he'd been before the silence. They'd buried their mother together. Survived the aftermath of her death when the plantation felt most dangerous. They'd protected each other through years of uncertainty and threat. She remembered his voice. She was the only person alive who did. Their mother Esther used to hum while working, a melody with no words that somehow contained comfort. Ruth still hummed it sometimes when she thought no one was listening. Caleb would hear it across the yard and feel something in his chest loosen, just slightly. Shared memories of Esther lived between them. The way she'd braid Ruth's hair. The stories she'd tell about her own mother. The quiet strength she'd modeled until sickness took her in 1850. Losing Ruth meant losing all of that. That evening, he saw her near the kitchen house. Her eyes were red but dry. She looked at him across the yard, and he saw the fear she was trying to hide. She was terrified of separation, of being alone in a strange city with strange people, of never seeing him again. He held her gaze, made a promise with his eyes that his voice couldn't speak. 3 weeks. That's all he had. And he still possessed the will. The document that proved they shouldn't be property at all. The proof their enslavement was illegal. Ruth was worth more than his silence. For 2 years he'd carried the secret, paralyzed by the impossibility of using it. But impossibility felt different now. Caleb's decision crystallized in that moment. And that night, Caleb did something he'd never done before. For the first time in 17 years, Caleb was going to make a sound. Night settled heavy over the plantation. No moon. Just stars scattered across black sky like salt spilled on dark cloth. Caleb sat outside his cabin, listening to the others settle into sleep. His heart hammered against his ribs, a rhythm he couldn't control, couldn't slow. He'd made a copy of the will months ago. Careful transcription by candlelight stolen from the main house. Every word matched to the original, hidden separately in case one was discovered. The copy was folded in his pocket now. He started walking. Crickets sang in waves, their sound rising and falling with his footsteps. The air smelled of turned earth and distant rain. Each step felt heavier than the last, like walking through water that got deeper with every movement. Thornton's quarters sat separate from the main house, a small structure with a single window glowing yellow from candlelight inside. Caleb reached the door. His hand trembled as he raised it. Hesitated. This was the first intentional sound he would make in 17 years. Once he knocked, everything would change. There would be no going back to invisibility, no return to the safety of silence. He knocked. 3 solid raps against weathered wood. Footsteps inside. The door opened. Thornton stood in the doorway, shirt unbuttoned, suspenders hanging loose. His expression shifted from irritation to surprise when he saw who stood there. The mute slave. At his door. After dark. They stared at each other. Neither moved. Caleb reached slowly into his pocket. Pulled out the folded paper. Extended it toward Thornton without breaking eye contact. Thornton took it. Stepped back. Gestured for Caleb to wait. He unfolded the paper near the candle on his desk. His eyes moved across the text, quick at first, then slower as comprehension dawned. His jaw tightened. His brow furrowed. He read it twice. The silence between them stretched like pulled wire, thin, taut, ready to snap. Thornton looked up. His expression had changed. Something colder. More calculating. Does Harrington know? Caleb shook his head. Thornton set the paper down carefully, as though it might ignite. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, studying Caleb with new intensity. If you show him this, he'll burn it. You understand that, don't you? Caleb nodded. And if you try to run with your sister, I will find you. That's my job. I'm paid to prevent exactly this kind of thing. Caleb didn't move. Just stood there, waiting for judgment. Waiting to discover if revealing his secret meant death or something else. Thornton could have killed him right there. Nobody would have questioned it. An enslaved man showing up at night with forged documents? Self-defense. Justified. Expected. But instead, Thornton did something nobody expected. He stepped aside. Not far. Just enough to clear the doorway. Go. One word. Quiet. Final. Not freedom. Never freedom. But mercy. A recognition of something Thornton couldn't quite name. Maybe he saw the will's legitimacy. Maybe he recognized the injustice it represented. Maybe he simply respected the courage it took for a mute man to knock on his door. Whatever the reason, he was letting Caleb leave without punishment, without chains, without the consequences both men knew were warranted. Caleb walked back into the night. His legs felt unsteady. His breath came shallow and quick. Behind him, Thornton remained in the doorway, silhouetted by candlelight, watching until Caleb disappeared into darkness. What Thornton did next would shock everyone, and it would cost him everything. Dawn broke with Thornton already dressed, already moving toward the main house. He requested a private meeting with Charles Harrington. Urgent matters. Required immediate discussion. Harrington, surprised but curious, agreed. The study door closed behind them at 8 in the morning. House servants lingered near the hallway, straining to hear through thick walls. Voices inside remained low, indistinct. Occasionally one would rise, Harrington's, sharp with irritation or surprise. Then Thornton's, steady and measured, bringing the temperature back down. No one knows what was said in that room. Did Thornton show him the will? Lay the document on Harrington's desk and watch his reaction? Force him to confront his father's intentions and his own complicity in ignoring them? Or did he threaten to expose the illegal enslavement? Use the will as leverage, suggesting that certain authorities in Savannah might find the document interesting if Ruth's sale proceeded? Maybe he negotiated. Offered to stay quiet in exchange for Ruth's protection. Promised continued efficiency and loyalty if Harrington canceled the transaction. Perhaps he appealed to Harrington's sense of honor, if the man possessed any. Reminded him that his father's final wishes deserved respect, regardless of financial pressure. The power dynamics made the conversation treacherous. Overseers worked for plantation owners. They were employees, replaceable, subordinate. Thornton had no legal authority to challenge Harrington's decisions about property sales. Yet Thornton held information. And information, presented correctly, could shift power temporarily. His motivations remained unclear. Had something awakened in him? Some moral recognition that 14 years of illegal enslavement crossed a line even he couldn't justify? Or was it strategic calculation? Protecting his reputation by avoiding association with a transaction that could later be proven fraudulent? Maybe he operated by a personal code, harsh but consistent. He'd break spirits through systematic control, but he wouldn't participate in outright theft of freedom that should have been granted legally. Perhaps he simply recognized injustice when it was documented, witnessed, undeniable. 2 hours passed. The door opened. Thornton emerged first, his expression unreadable. Not satisfied, not defeated. Just blank. Professional. Harrington followed, looking troubled but composed. He said nothing to the waiting servants. Dismissed them with a wave. 2 days later, everything changed. Ruth's sale was postponed indefinitely. Harrington sent word to the Savannah rice planter. The servant had taken ill. Quarantine concerns. Couldn't risk transporting someone potentially contagious. The transaction would need to be reconsidered at a later date. The planter, frustrated but cautious about disease, agreed to withdraw his offer. Ruth remained. And Caleb was reassigned. No longer relegated to distant fields, he was moved to work closer to the main house. Repairing structures, maintaining equipment, tasks that kept him visible and nearby. Reward or surveillance? Impossible to tell. But whatever it was changed everything. Ruth was safe. The sale had been stopped without explanation, without public confrontation, without revealing the will's existence. Some debts, it seemed, couldn't be ignored. But the real question was, what did Thornton see in Caleb that made him step aside? July brought heat that pressed down like a hand. August followed with no relief. Caleb's new routine kept him near the main house. Repairing porch railings. Fixing broken shutters. Maintaining the equipment shed. Work that brought him into Thornton's path multiple times each day. They never spoke. Caleb couldn't, and Thornton didn't. But an understanding existed between them now, unspoken, complicated, impossible to define. They'd each revealed something the other wasn't supposed to see. Caleb had shown his literacy and the will. Thornton had shown mercy when his job demanded punishment. Neither could take it back. Ruth remained on the plantation, still assigned to house work. She didn't understand why the sale had been canceled. Harrington had offered no explanation beyond the illness story, which everyone knew was fabricated. She caught Caleb's eye one evening near the kitchen house. Her expression held confusion mixed with profound relief. She was still here. Still safe. For now. But she didn't know the cost. Thornton's behavior had shifted. Subtle changes, but noticeable to those who paid attention. He was less harsh. Slower to anger. More contemplative when observing the work gangs. He still maintained order. Still enforced discipline. But something fundamental had altered in his approach. Other enslaved people noticed. Whispered about it during brief moments of privacy. The overseer seemed different. Distracted. Almost reluctant. They didn't understand why. Caleb understood perfectly. Thornton had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd chosen to protect two people who, according to law and custom, deserved no protection. He'd acted against his employer's financial interests, against his own professional philosophy, and Caleb knew it. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest. Gratitude competed with awareness that nothing fundamental had changed. He and Ruth were still enslaved. The will remained hidden, a loaded gun that couldn't be fired without destroying everyone nearby. One document could prove their freedom, but proving it meant risking everything. The legal system wouldn't side with them. White courts didn't overturn white men's property claims based on inconvenient wills, especially when presented by literate slaves who weren't supposed to read. Charles Harrington's behavior also changed. He watched Caleb now. Not overtly, but Caleb felt the attention. Occasional glances across the yard. Longer looks when Caleb worked near the house. Does he know? Did Thornton show him the will? Or did he simply sense something had shifted, some transaction between overseer and slave that disrupted normal hierarchy? The fragile equilibrium held through July, through August. Each day passed without incident, but tension accumulated like humidity before storms. Thornton's reputation began suffering beyond the plantation. Other overseers heard about the cancelled sale, about his changed demeanor. They questioned his methods in conversations at Harrington's neighbors' properties. Too soft, they said. Losing his edge. Letting slaves manipulate him. Plantation owners noticed too. Efficiency remained high, but Thornton's cold certainty, the quality that made him valuable, had developed cracks. He was becoming isolated. Distrusted by peers who saw weakness where he saw complexity. The uneasy peace couldn't last forever. Something was about to break. And when it did, the consequences would reshape everything, not just for Caleb and Ruth, but for Thornton himself. The question was, who would break first? Late August. 3 weeks since Ruth's sale was postponed. Sunday morning arrived with pale light and relative quiet. The one day enslaved people were granted partial rest, time to mend clothes, tend small gardens, breathe without constant supervision. The discovery came early. A woman named Dinah was crossing the yard toward the well when she saw it. Stopped mid-step. Her hand flew to her mouth. Thornton's whip lay on the auction block, broken cleanly in two. The same block where Ruth would have stood 3 weeks earlier, waiting to be inspected by the Savannah rice planter. The same platform where countless people had been sold, evaluated like livestock, reduced to price and potential. Now it held the shattered remains of the overseer's primary instrument of control. Word spread instantly. People emerged from cabins, drawn by whispered urgency. They gathered at a distance, close enough to see, far enough to avoid suspicion of involvement. Shock registered on every face. Fear too. Breaking an overseer's whip wasn't carelessness. It was declaration. No one saw who did it, but everyone knew. The break itself told the story. Not frayed from wear. Not cracked from age. Snapped with deliberate force, the handle splintered where strong hands had gripped and twisted until leather and wood surrendered. Someone had done this intentionally. Someone with strength. Someone with purpose. Thornton arrived minutes later, alerted by a house servant. He approached slowly. The crowd parted without being told. He stopped at the edge of the block, looking down at the broken pieces. His expression didn't show rage. Not the cold fury everyone expected. Something else flickered across his features. Acceptance, maybe. Or understanding. He picked up one piece. Turned it slowly. Examined the break. Then he set it down and walked away. No interrogation. No demands for confession. No threats of punishment if the guilty party didn't come forward. The investigation that never happened spoke louder than any violence could have. Why didn't Thornton pursue it? Because he already understood. This wasn't rebellion in the traditional sense. This was response. Caleb had shown him the will, revealed 14 years of illegal enslavement, trusted him with devastating knowledge. Thornton had stopped Ruth's sale, protected them both, crossed lines that violated his professional identity. And now Caleb had responded with his own crossing. Breaking the whip on the block where Ruth would have stood wasn't random vandalism. It was communication. The only kind Caleb could offer. You spared her. I acknowledge that. But I also acknowledge what you represent. The enslaved community interpreted it differently. They saw a mute man who had finally spoken, not with words, but with action. They saw someone willing to risk everything to make a statement nobody could ignore. The symbolism resonated through the quarters. The whip represented power, control, systematic breaking of human will. Seeing it destroyed, left deliberately on the auction block, sent a message everyone understood. Some things cannot be repaired. That evening, Ruth saw Caleb near the equipment shed. Their eyes met across the yard. She understood immediately, not the details, but the essence. Her brother had done something dangerous. Something that couldn't be undone. And Thornton had chosen not to pursue it. This was the real defiance. Not running. Not fighting. But breaking the symbol and leaving it where everyone would see. Where everyone would know. The whip stayed on the block through Sunday. Nobody touched it. By Monday morning, it was gone. But this act would cost both men more than they knew. October 1856. 2 months after the broken whip. Rumors had spread like wildfire through neighboring plantations. Thornton's reputation, once built on cold efficiency, now carried whispers of weakness. He'd let a slave destroy his whip without consequence. He'd cancelled a profitable sale. He'd gone soft. Plantation owners at Sunday gatherings questioned his methods. Some did it subtly, through careful phrasing. Others were direct. Thornton had lost control. Charles Harrington felt the pressure from all sides. His debts hadn't disappeared. Creditors still demanded payment. The failed cotton crop left him vulnerable, exposed. He needed an overseer who could extract maximum productivity without hesitation. Someone who wouldn't let sentiment interfere with profit. Thornton's position became untenable. The conversation happened in early October. Private. Brief. Harrington didn't demand resignation outright, but the implication was clear. Adjust your methods or find employment elsewhere. Thornton chose to leave voluntarily. A plantation in South Carolina had offered him a position. Smaller operation, less scrutiny, fewer complications. A fresh start where his reputation hadn't yet been damaged by rumors of mercy. He accepted immediately. His final 2 weeks on the Harrington plantation passed in strange quiet. He continued his duties mechanically, supervising work, maintaining schedules, enforcing basic discipline. But the intensity had drained from him. Other enslaved people noticed. He seemed distant, preoccupied, present but already gone. Caleb saw him on the second-to-last day. They were both near the equipment shed, Caleb repairing a broken plow blade, Thornton inspecting stored tools for the new overseer who would arrive next month. Their eyes met. No words. No gestures. Just a moment of recognition. What each man understood about the other couldn't be spoken. Thornton had learned that absolute control required destroying parts of himself he hadn't known existed. That witnessing injustice documented in legal language made complicity harder to justify. Caleb had learned that even the hardest men carried capacity for choice. That power could choose mercy, even when mercy violated every incentive. Neither would forget the other. Thornton had arrived to break wills. He left with his own worldview broken, not shattered, but cracked enough that certainty would never feel the same again. His departure day arrived without ceremony. No farewell speech. No formal goodbye to staff or enslaved workers. He packed his belongings into saddlebags, mounted his horse at dawn, and rode toward the main road. Caleb was in the eastern field, working the last cotton before frost. He paused, straightened, watched Thornton's figure grow smaller against the morning sky. Thornton never looked back. The horse's hooves kicked up dust that hung in still air long after he'd disappeared. Ruth felt relief when she heard he was gone. The man who'd held power over their lives, who'd known their secret, who could have destroyed them with a word, removed. The immediate danger had passed. But Caleb knew better. Thornton leaving didn't solve the fundamental problem. They were still enslaved. The will was still hidden in the abandoned cabin, useless as proof, dangerous as possession. Ruth was safe for now, but for now wasn't freedom. Harrington's financial troubles would continue. Another sale could be arranged. Another buyer could arrive. And the next overseer might not show mercy. Thornton's choice would echo forward in ways neither man could predict. Because what happened next, no one could prevent. And then everything fell apart. 3 years passed. 1856 became 1857. 1857 became 1858. Time moved the way it always did on plantations, measured in planted rows and harvested crops, in seasons that repeated without variation. The new overseer was harsher, more typical. He used the whip frequently, believing visible punishment prevented invisible resistance. No mercy, no complexity, just brutal efficiency. Caleb and Ruth survived together. That was enough. That had to be enough. The will remained hidden in the abandoned cabin. Caleb checked on it occasionally, making sure it hadn't been discovered, hadn't deteriorated beyond recognition. Still there. Still useless. Still dangerous. December 1859 brought unexpected change. Charles Harrington died suddenly. Heart failure, the doctor said. Collapsed in his study on a Tuesday afternoon, dead before anyone could respond. His estate was in ruins. Years of poor crops, mounting debts, failed investments, everything had compounded into financial catastrophe. The plantation owed more than it was worth. Creditors descended immediately. They demanded liquidation. Total sale of all assets to recover what they could. Everything must be sold. The land, the buildings, the equipment, the livestock, the people. The auction was scheduled for mid-January 1860. Word spread through the quarters like a death sentence. Everyone would be sold. Families separated. Children taken from mothers. Husbands from wives. Siblings from each other. 3 years of borrowed time. And then it ran out. Caleb and Ruth had their final weeks together on the plantation where they'd been born, where their mother had died, where they'd survived things that should have destroyed them. They didn't speak. Caleb couldn't, and Ruth had learned to communicate through glances, through presence, through the subtle language of people who'd spent their lives reading each other. She still didn't know about the will. Caleb had never told her. Never explained why her sale had been stopped 3 years earlier. Never revealed that legally, They should have been free since 1842. Should he tell her now? What would it change? Knowing they'd been enslaved illegally for 17 years wouldn't stop the auction. Wouldn't prevent separation. Would only add knowledge of injustice to the pain of loss. He kept silent. January 1860. Auction day arrived cold and gray. Buyers came from across Georgia, from Alabama, from South Carolina. Planters looking for field hands. Wealthy families seeking house servants. Speculators buying cheap to sell high in other markets. Ruth was purchased by a family in Augusta. They needed someone for domestic work. Paid $900, less than the Savannah rice planter had offered 3 years earlier, but still a respectable price. Caleb went to a cotton planter from Alabama. A man named Morrison who needed strong workers for expansion. $800. Separate buyers. Different directions. The separation happened quickly. No time for goodbyes, no opportunity for final words. Caleb couldn't speak anyway. Ruth looked at him across the auction yard. Her eyes held everything: grief, fear, love, memory. She was trying to memorize his face, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Caleb held her gaze. Made one last silent promise he knew he couldn't keep. I'll find you. Somehow. I'll find you. But they both understood the truth. This was forever. The promise he couldn't keep haunted him as they were led in opposite directions. Ruth toward a wagon heading east. Caleb toward a group being assembled for the journey west into Alabama. The will that could have saved them, still hidden in the abandoned cabin. Still powerless. Still buried among forgotten things. Everything Thornton had protected was torn apart in a single afternoon. The irony was devastating. The document that proved their freedom likely ended up burned or discarded when the estate papers were sorted. Lost among the debris of a failed plantation. Never filed, never recognized, never able to fulfill the intentions of a dead man who tried to do one decent thing. Ruth disappeared into Augusta. Caleb into Alabama. But Caleb left something behind. The story didn't end there. Years later, someone discovered the Harrington family Bible. It had survived the estate liquidation, passed through distant relatives who kept it for sentimental value without examining its contents closely. Inside the front cover, beneath the recorded births and deaths, was an inscription, dated 1856. Written in handwriting nobody recognized. Some debts cannot be sold. Beneath it, Caleb's name. Who wrote it? Thornton, before he left Georgia? Caleb himself, in a moment of defiance nobody witnessed? Someone else who knew the story and wanted to preserve it? The handwriting gave no answers. The inscription remained a mystery. The will disappeared completely. 3 theories emerged over time. Some say it still exists, locked in a courthouse archive that nobody's searched thoroughly. Court records from that era were chaotic, poorly organized. Documents vanished into storage rooms and stayed there for generations. Others believe Thornton kept it. That he took the copy Caleb had given him and preserved it. That it passed through his family, tucked inside books or papers, carrying a story his descendants never understood. A few think Charles Harrington burned it the night he learned the truth. That Thornton showed it to him during that private meeting, and Harrington destroyed it immediately to protect his financial interests. All 3 are possible. None can be proven. Thornton's life after Georgia was documented but unrevealing. He worked as an overseer in South Carolina until 1873. Died of pneumonia at age 52. Left no personal writings, no letters that survived, no records of what he thought about that summer in 1856. Whatever transformation occurred in him stayed private. Ruth's fate was clearer. She worked in Augusta until emancipation in 1865. Gained her freedom at 33. Married a freedman named Isaac 2 years later. Had no children. Lived quietly, worked as a seamstress. She died in 1889, having lived to see freedom but never reuniting with her brother. Caleb worked Morrison's plantation in Alabama until emancipation. Records show he was there in 1865, freed alongside others when the war ended. Then he disappears. No death record. No census entry after 1865. No trace of where he went or what he became. Some people vanish completely from history. Their stories end mid-sentence, their fates unknown. The enduring questions haunt what remains. What did Thornton see in Caleb's eyes that night? What made a man dedicated to absolute control choose mercy instead? Why did he step aside when everything in his training, his philosophy, his profession demanded punishment? Did the will ever surface? Did anyone besides Thornton, Caleb, and possibly Harrington ever see it? And did Caleb ever speak again? After 17 years of silence, after emancipation freed him from the constraints that had required invisibility, did his voice return? Nobody knows. But the broken whip remains symbolic. Power can be shattered. Control can be challenged, even by those who seem powerless. The larger meaning persists. Humanity survives within inhumane systems. People find ways to resist, to protect each other, to maintain dignity when everything is designed to strip it away. Caleb's story matters because it reveals hidden truths about delayed justice and moral courage. About documents that should have freed people but didn't. About moments when individuals chose mercy over duty, even when it cost them everything. If stories like Caleb's matter to you, because they deserve to be remembered, then join us. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bells so you never miss the next story. Some say the will still exists somewhere, waiting to be found. Others say it was burned the night Harrington learned the truth. But no one knows what Thornton saw in Caleb's eyes. And no one ever heard Caleb speak again. The only sound that mattered was the one he'd already made.